Hey guys, Miss Drake here, and I'm here to help you with the Articles of Confederation assignment. So what I'm going to do is make a video that if you want to, it's not a requirement. If you want to, you can use this to help you to answer the questions on the Articles of Confederation questions. So when you pull this up, you'll see that there is information about state constitutions, then the Articles of Confederation, what it looks like, and then the weaknesses in Shays Rebellion. Then there are questions to answer at the bottom of the page. So be sure that you are going to make yourself a copy and you have it in your folder. It might be helpful to put it in your civics folder, so be sure to click on that and make sure it's in your civics folder. I think it's easy for me to access it if you forget to turn it in so I can see that, but hopefully you won't do that. But once you make a copy of it, you also need to be sure, go ahead and check the share settings as well. So click this blue button up here at the top right hand corner and make sure that it does not say restricted. If it says restricted, I can't get a hold of it. So click on that. You have a little drop down arrow that you click on, and then you just select anyone with the link. And then you can click done. So that way I can get a hold of your assignment when you submit it into Canvas. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about state constitutions. Again, yes, I know we've already talked about these some, but I'm going to go over them again one time and answer some questions about state constitutions. So we have the American Revolutionary War. So the American Revolution, the war itself, is from 1775 to 1783. Now, in 1776, something very special happened. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. And so you'll see here that the Second Continental Congress, right there you go, which actually met in 1775 after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, they adopted the Declaration of Independence. And that is going to declare the 13 colonies independence from Great Britain, making them states, free and independent states. Now, those states had their own state constitutions. New Hampshire was actually the first, as early as January of 1776, and then the other 12 also had their constitutions. What is a constitution? Do you remember? I'll be asking you this a pretty good bit. It's pretty important. A constitution is a list or set of laws that establishes how a government works. So there's one for states, and they're going to tell you how to govern a state, like North Carolina or New Hampshire or New York or Florida. And then you have the federal constitution. The United States Constitution will explain federal laws that all states should follow. Now, state constitutions back in the 1700s were very similar in that they had 3 branches of government. You have to remember this too, it's very important. And in this order, it's easier if you remember it in this order: legislative, executive, and judicial. For each constitution, for each state, they had a legislature, the legislative branch. They made laws for the state. Most of the legislatures were bicameral, bi meaning 2, cameral meaning houses. So there were 2 houses. Usually they're called the Senate and the House of Representatives. Whether it's state or federal, it's called the State Senate or the Federal Senate. And then you have the State House of Representatives and the Federal House of Representatives. Now, members of these 2 houses are chosen in different ways. Then states also had an executive branch, which is a governor, basically. Legislators or citizens elected state governors to make sure that laws were carried out or enforced. So the governor's job is to take these laws a legislative branch makes and make sure that they are followed. So things like law enforcement falls under the executive branch. Then the judicial branch is where you have courts that's going to settle disputes between people or try to figure out if you broke the law. So it's criminal law, it's civil law, which is between people, it's constitutional law about the Constitution and your civil rights. Most state constitutions also included a Bill of Rights to provide citizens with specific freedoms and protection under the law. Because what's the main purpose of government? To protect your rights. I hope you said that in your mind, at least, maybe out loud. So if we were to look at our questions looking at state constitutions, I'm going to scroll down and talk about those. So number 1 is asking about 3 important documents that came before the creation of the U.S. Constitution. So one of them is definitely going to be the Declaration of Independence. That's pretty important. Let me try that again. That didn't quite work out as well as what I had hoped. Oops. Declaration of Independence. Then the second one, state constitutions. That annoys me when it does that. State constitutions. And then, of course, the Articles of Confederation. So all of those were pretty significant in terms of giving us something to go on for the U.S. Constitution, and we'll talk about the Constitution a little bit later. The branches of government that each state government had, do you remember what they were and in order? Which one makes the law? The legislative branch. Which one enforces the law? Executive branch. Or sometimes we say they execute the law, even though that sounds a little bit violent, but they do enforce or carry out or execute the law. And then the last one, the judicial branch. So be sure to practice those 3 if you haven't already. Now let's scroll back up and talk about the Articles of Confederation. Now, what happens is that after the state governments are created, and there are 13 state governments, they're pretty much well prepared to govern themselves. They were ready for that because, of course, they were ready for freedom and revolution. And they finally all got on board with independence from Great Britain. But there are some things that the states couldn't do on their own. The main thing that they were afraid of is winning the American Revolution. Or, no, they weren't afraid of winning. They were afraid of losing the revolution that they wouldn't win. So they realized that they were going to have to create this huge army. And so they realized that these 13 separate states are going to have to kind of work together in order to defeat the British in the American Revolution. So the American Revolution, which is, again, you'll see on your screen, 1775 to 1783, we declare our independence right after the Revolution began, after the Battle of Lexington and Concord. So we declare our independence July 4th, 1776. Then we have all of these states. In 1777, 1 year approximately after the Declaration, the Second Continental Congress created a plan to unify the 13 states in a document called the Articles of Confederation. My 2 dogs aren't getting along. Usually it's the smaller one that winds up winning. I don't know why. Hang on, I gotta go fuss at them. They were fighting over a bone. Okay, so the Second Continental Congress decided they were going to create a plan to unify these 13 colonies. Basically, they were going to create a federal government. First federal government we've ever had. It was pretty scary for us because we did not want to create a federal government that was going to treat us like Great Britain had. Something that would strip us of our rights. We'd be creating a monster, basically, that could devour us. Not literally, maybe literally, the rights, figuratively for sure. So the Articles of Confederation is the first federal constitution of the United States of America. Now, a confederation is not what we have today. A confederation is a group of individual states that basically form a league of friendship, a loose alliance, so to speak. And they really don't want to surrender a lot of their individual power or sovereignty. So each of these 13 states want to remain as independent as possible, and they give very little power to the federal government in the Articles of Confederation. By 1871, now even though they started in 1777, did you notice it takes to 1781 for all states to agree to this? That's several years, or a few years, several years, whatever. So why does it take so long? It's because not all states wanted this federal government, and they were scared about what it would look like. So they created a very weak federal government, and they did that on purpose, mainly because they were scared that a federal government would strip them of their rights and power. So what did the Articles of Confederation look like? What did it do? Okay, now the Articles of Confederation is a constitution. So again, a constitution is a law or a series of laws that explains how government works. It creates the structure for for government. Even though states had 3 branches of government, those states created a federal government with only 1 branch, and that was the legislative branch, and it's called the Confederation Congress. Today we just have the United States Congress, but this is the Confederation Congress. It's the only branch of government. They could make laws for the states, but they couldn't enforce them. So my question to you is how effective do you think this is going to be? If your folks at home make rules and laws for you, if your adult makes laws for you, rules, but they never enforce them, are you going to follow them? Probably not, or at least the ones you don't want to. And nothing ever happens to you, so it's very ineffective. The legislature was unicameral, which means one. Uni means one house. In each state, regardless of how many people were in the state, each state had 1 vote. So there were 13 votes total in America under the Confederation Congress. Now, what the Congress could do under the Articles, of course, they could create laws. I've got that right here. They could lead a national army, but they had a very difficult time putting one together, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. And they could work with foreign countries for states, like trying to negotiate peace treaties or something like that. There are 2 laws that we talk about in the Confederation Congress because we really do bash the Confederation Congress and the Articles of Confederation and how bad and terrible and awful it is. But always see the other side too, the other issues. There were 2 laws, the Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This was probably the only good thing that comes out of the Articles of Confederation because it helps to organize westward settlement as we are expanding west in America. Now, I'm going to show you a map. Hang on for just a second. I'm going to try to use this. I hope you can see it well on the screen. This is Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. And this is the Northwest Territory. This is as far west as we had gone in the 1700s. We haven't made it to California yet. But what they did is they laid out the cities in this grid-like pattern where you can organize people to move, and people just didn't move out willy-nilly out west in order to try to just grab land and nobody knows who owns what territory. This is another map to kind of put that into perspective here with these areas that were the Northwest Territories and how they were laid out in a kind of a grid-like pattern where it was a very organized way to settle westward. Of course, that's great for America, but don't forget, it's pretty bad for the Native Americans that are already living there. So coming back to our information, those 2 laws are good for American expansion. Now, what the Confederation Congress could not do, notice that there are a lot more. There's a lot of things they could not do. They could not enforce their laws because there was no executive branch. If a state ignored a law, nothing could be done about it. And that becomes a problem. The Confederation Congress could not actually require states to do anything. So it was very weak and ineffective, and they did that on purpose. Why? Because they were scared. They were scared that they would be creating their own tyrant. They had just freed themselves from one of the most powerful countries in the world, because this is Great Britain, that had colonies everywhere all over the world except Antarctica, and they had a very powerful navy, very strong empire, very wealthy. And now these 13 states are free and independent, and they didn't want to create a government that was going to do the same thing to them that England just had. So they made that weak on purpose. The Confederation Congress couldn't tax. What are taxes going for? Really to pay for how government operates and services for citizens. But the Confederation Congress could not do that. The Confederation Congress could also not control trade between states. So each of these 13 states had different, not only currencies, but different trade laws. And that could become a problem because one might not want to trade the way the other does. There's no court system to settle disputes, so there was no way to settle problems between states. It was difficult to pass any federal laws. 9 out of 13 states had to agree. And it took a miracle, really, to get all 13 states on board just for independence. The Confederation Congress also couldn't change the Articles without the agreement of all 13 states. Virtually impossible. So it becomes problematic eventually, but it's put in place for a little while. So let's scroll down and take a look at some of our questions. The one branch that the Articles of Confederation had, I'll give you a second to think about that. Do you remember what it was? The one branch of government? There are 3 branches, legislative, executive, and judicial. The one branch that the Articles had was the legislative branch. Of course, it's the lawmaking branch. You might have also called it the Confederation Congress. There we go. So what caused Americans to realize that they needed a federal government? It was the need for a military to wage war against Britain in the American Revolution. Now, there were other reasons too, like how to pay for war debt and those kinds of things. But this was a big problem for them. They needed a military for the American Revolution. The positive thing, and I'm going to put that right here, the positive thing in the Articles of Confederation, and really the only positive thing, and that's going to help organize westward expansion. Okay, and so that's a good thing for Americans, but again, bad for Native Americans. Let's talk about these 5 weaknesses while we're here. There's more than 5. So let's start with just a couple. Number 1, there's only one branch of government. And that's going to be the legislative. So you can make laws, but not enforce them. That's a problem. They couldn't tax. The federal government could not tax. The federal government could not control trade between states. That could lead to, if you're thinking about it logically, that could lead to disputes between states, and there's no court to settle disputes between states. Even though the Articles of Confederation could maintain an army, they couldn't raise an army because the states had to agree to commit soldiers. And, you know, North Carolina might say, well, South Carolina is only going to offer 10,000. We're going to only offer 10,000 too, and maybe we have more people. Also, you could say, just as another point, some others, is that each state had only one vote. So the states with more people had the same voice as the state with the fewest people. So that might be a problem too with representation. And another one that I could think of is that it was difficult to pass federal laws because you had to have 9 out of 13 to agree, or change the Articles of Confederation. There you had to have 13 out of 13 to agree. So it's pretty difficult. So the question here, number 7, why do you think that the Second Continental Congress created a weak federal government? So think about that really. Why do you think that they would do that on purpose? Would create, basically you're setting yourself up for failure, but they didn't know that then. It's because they were seriously afraid of a strong federal government that would strip them of their rights, like the English government had. They would be creating for themselves a monster, a tyrant, a tyrannical government. So how did we get to the U.S. Constitution? How did we get from the Articles of Confederation to the U.S. Constitution? Well, let's go back up here and read about Shays' Rebellion. So this is a pretty interesting moment in history. So what happens is that we win our independence from Great Britain, and the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, ending the American Revolution, but America still had some serious problems. One of the biggest is financial problems, because we were in debt. Like we said about the French and Indian War, wars are expensive. This is no different. England's not going to pay for the war. They're just not going to do that. So now what we're going to have to do is pay for the war. And the problem is that you're unable to collect taxes. The federal government can't collect taxes to pay for that, so it's up to each state to bear their burden. And of course, Massachusetts, the site of the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, and Lexington and Concord, they're going to have more war debt because more stuff happened there than a place like Georgia, where very few things happened. So this debt would take years to repay. State governments had also fallen into debt. They heavily taxed their citizens. Of course, Massachusetts had higher taxes than other states, and that would drive people out of business, like farmers. That created a lot of resentment for this new federal government. States also taxed imports from other states, so goods coming into their state, trying to make money to pay off this war debt. The Confederation Congress, this new federal government, had no way to solve these problems. They knew these problems existed when they wrote the Articles of Confederation, but they were not going to make a federal government that would solve these problems. They were going to say states can handle that, but it wasn't going to work. So the problem then was many Americans were afraid that the new government would not protect their safety, rights, and property. What's the main purpose of government again? To protect your rights. And so in 1786 and 1787, there were riots. Yeah, even back then they had riots. The most significant one is Daniel Shays' rebellion. Now, Daniel Shays was a war hero. He fought in the American Revolution. He helped to win our independence from Great Britain, and now he's a farmer. He's in debt because of the taxes in Massachusetts. So the Massachusetts state government is threatening to take away this war hero's farm. That's bad. And so Daniel Shays said it's not going to happen, and he got other people to agree with him as well. So Daniel Shays, along with 1,200 armed Massachusetts men, are going to attack a federal arsenal in Massachusetts in order to, basically try to gain more weapons to go and stop this from happening, to stop the government from taking their farms. Now, the rebellion was stopped, and it was stopped kind of quickly. It was a wake-up call for the entire country. This made the news everywhere that this was happening, and everybody was kind of disgusted about the fact that a war hero was losing his farm. He helped secure independence and freedom for people, and now he's losing his farm? That's not fair. So this is proof that we needed a stronger federal government to deal with our problems of war debt, to protect our rights, to protect our property. And these problems were caused by the American Revolution, but now we needed a government that could solve the effects of the American Revolution. And so it's in 1787 that leaders from 12 states, Rhode Island didn't attend because they didn't think they needed a stronger federal government, they're going to sit down and try to fix the Articles of Confederation. But in truth, what they're going to do is throw it out and create the U.S. Constitution. So looking at our questions, how did Shays' Rebellion prove that America needed a stronger federal government? So again, what happened in Shays' Rebellion is that the Massachusetts state government was threatening to, going to take away this war hero's farm in order to pay his debt because Massachusetts was in debt. So it proves that we need a stronger federal government to protect rights and property and make Americans feel safer. So we definitely needed this stronger federal government. Now, what's the difference between a state government and a federal government? So a state government, that might seem silly, but I just want to make sure that people understand. A state government is just going to control the state. A federal government basically has authority to some level, some authority over all states. So this is the United States, okay? This is USA. This is North Carolina, okay? So just to kind of give you a heads up to make sure that you understand that. If you already understand that, I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but I just want to make sure that's clear. We've already talked about what a constitution is. So this is a series of laws, or laws in general, that explains how a government, whether it's state or federal, works. Now, our first constitution is a confederation, and that's a loose agreement of states to create a weak federal government. The states are going to have more power than the federal government. In number 12, what was the Confederation Congress? This is the legislative branch that was created by the Articles of Confederation. Now, for numbers 13 and 14, it's your opinion. Do you think it was fair that each state had only one vote in the Confederation Congress? Some are going to say yes and some are going to say no. Either way, tell me why. If you're unsure, kind of explain a little bit about that. What doesn't make sense to you about that? And number 14, in your opinion, which made the new federal government weaker? The inability to tax or the inability to enforce law? I have my own opinion about that, and we'll discuss those next week. So if you have any questions about this, of course, you can send me an email. But be sure that you submit your assignment, and I hope this has helped. But let me know, please, if you have any questions. See you later.